All right, here we go. Hey guys, I am Kristen Howerton, and I am here with Leslie Dixon, who is a sex educator, and she works with an organization called Birds and Bees Connection, and I have enlisted her to have some conversations with me about how to talk to our kids about sex. And we have been wanting to kind of, in the next couple sessions, go up the chain developmentally. And today we want to talk about how you talk specifically with 5, 6, maybe 7-year-olds.
True.
How you get started with that conversation with the younger set.
So, when I'd like to have you really be the person to start that conversation, because you've had that, you know, and it's more recent for you. For me, way back when, my kids had to live with a sex educator, so it was part of their life all the time. But it's more recent for you, and especially because with 2 biological and 2, special boys, how is that different, having that conversation? And then I'd like to talk really and address how to have these conversations and not be so uncomfortable.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I do think as we're talking about sex with kids, we have to be careful to be inclusive. And I don't think that that's true just for parents of biological children, because when we tell a narrative of, sex is when, a husband and wife or mommy and daddy come together to make a baby, we are leaving out large swaths of people.
Right.
Because many times babies are conceived outside of marriage.
Correct.
Babies are born to same-sex couples. They're born through
in vitro.
Through in vitro.
Right.
Some kids come into their families by adoption. So it is important, even in those early conversations, I think we want to simplify things by saying it's a thing that mommies and daddies do in order to have a baby.
Right.
But I do think we have to explain to our kids, which is uncomfortable for us, that sex is actually an activity that people do, not always to have a baby.
Correct.
And that they're not always married.
Right.
Right.
And I think when we're having these conversations, I think it's really important to address that, because I think in what we want to address here is, in a true case, when you're talking about a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old, in that curiosity and having that conversation, that is there's that normalcy here. But I think what you're saying is that there's so many. It's the rainbow now. There's so many different situations, and I think helping parents, whatever those situations may be, with the language, and I think that's really the crucial part, is getting comfortable with the language. And you said it a couple weeks ago, just do it until you get comfortable,
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it until you make it. And I think that's so important. And I think we've started the conversation with that issue of, when you have young children, start the basics. You've got to start just with the basics, proper terminology, helping them feel comfortable, in their body, even in your body.
Well, you don't want that first conversation about how babies are made to be where you also explain what a penis is.
Right.
Perfect.
Yes.
This should be a continuum. It should be a conversation. So not every revelation is happening at once. So when you do finally sit down to explain, okay, the way the baby is made is penis and vagina, they're not going, wait, I just learned what that was.
Right.
They're comfortable. They're already comfortable with those.
And more than likely, as a rule, they're not going to come to you if you haven't opened that door. And if the comfort level hasn't been established, if there's that sense of discomfort and, improper terminology, and, that there's something wrong with their bodies and an adult body, more than likely they won't. I've got a 6-year-old grandson, and because he's got a grandmother who is a sex educator, he from early on has had all this language. And when he did at 5 come to my daughter, and my daughter was prepared, had that conversation, which we're going to have this conversation in a second, he heard it, he went, oh, okay, moved on. And again, it was that realization that we're so afraid of this topic. We're afraid what they're going to ask. We're afraid what we're going to talk about, what we're going to say. And it's not that bad. No. So this conversation is really how to have it.
Well, and I think the big question people have on this is when what is that age? What's the magical age? Everyone wants to know. You know, we're using the right terms and we're dancing around the topic, but what's the age where we say what sex is?
Right. And I'm not sure there's actually, I can tell you that it's too late if they haven't had any kind of conversation by 4 years, fourth grade. By fourth grade, if there hasn't been any conversation and you haven't opened the doors and they don't feel comfortable in their bodies, then that's almost too late.
Well, I have 2 fourth graders, and I am here to report if you haven't told your kid by 4th grade, they know.
Oh, yeah.
From their peers.
They do. And where do you want them to get this information from? You know, I realize that most parents didn't get this information when they were younger, and there is this discomfort. But right now, you know, they're getting early on that playground from their peers or from social media, because younger and younger children have access to phones. So,
and we're going to talk about that in a later,
absolutely,
later episode.
There's a really great movie called Screenagers, and that's just a sidebar, but really it's something every parent should see.
Totally agree.
So when and how? When? Well, I think, again, it's that setting the stage is so important. It's the proper terminology. And what I find almost 100%, if those young people, and I mean those 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, feel comfortable in their body and they've seen some nudity, they're curious. They're not curious adults, they're curious children. And more than likely, they're going to come to you with some kind of question. And of course, all parents are concerned. They're going to say, you know, where did I come from? Well, first of all, you have to clarify what they're actually asking you. You know, did they come from Chicago? Did they come from, you know, the backyard? I mean, they first clarify.
Is that what they're asking?
What are they asking? You know, get the story straight before you even start. And back up a little bit. And I think it's important, parents need to be prepared. So this is the first approximation, listening to us. And then get books. There are wonderful books. Where Did I Come From? The Stork. You know, even if you Google it, there's some great information that out there. Get comfortable in your own skin. And don't forget, you know, write it down. Now, the other thing is that if your child comes to you and you're not prepared, let's say it's before they go to bed or you're driving in the car.
Well, it's never when you're prepared. No, it's always when it happens.
It's always, you'll never be prepared. So, if this really is a little bit uncomfortable, then you can always say to them, that's a great question. I want to be able to answer it for you. So I need to get prepared. So I give you the correct information. So I give you the information that you're looking for, and give me a little bit to get that information together, and we'll sit down and we're going to talk about this. Because we're all thinking the minute it happens, we've got to have the conversation immediately. And it doesn't have to happen immediately. It has to happen. If they're asking it, you really need to, you need to answer it. But again, first clarification. What are they really asking? Less is more. And then understanding what each situation might be different. So you also have to think of the language for that. Are they adopted? You know, is there a surrogacy? Is it in vitro? You know, so you've got to get comfortable with that language as well.
And I think, you know, when we're talking about age 4, 5, 6, 7, even if you feel like they're not developmentally ready for, you know, the intercourse equals babies conversation, I think that's a really good window in which you explain the different kinds of families. And that kids understand, maybe you're not going to explain sex yet, but that they understand that everyone is born into someone's tummy. And then some people stay with their birth mom, and some people go, you know, but that's a really good time to explain the different ways a family can look, because that isn't just the job of adoptive parents. Everyone should be explaining all of those differences.
I think that's really true because we're seeing so many of those situations out there. And I think that's a great way to educate young people. So as they go into school situations and they are really around different situations, that they're comfortable with it. So I think I agree with you. I think that's a great way to start. There's all these preliminaries that you can start with. And yes, you hope they come to you. If they don't, I think starting here with the preliminaries that babies are really, there's different situations in the homes. But I think, eventually the actual conversation is going to happen.
Yeah.
And even, it's just so interesting how it is the thing that most people are most concerned about. And it's so easy. So it's so funny. It's really, mechanically, it really is pretty easy, And again, it's the terminology, how you want to use it of, a mommy and daddy preparing for having a baby. Or whatever language you need to use, that's going to feel comfortable for you. Now, here's something I was really thinking about. I actually think even small diagrams are helpful as well, because when you're starting to talk about a sperm and an egg and it's, going to where it's going to, I think, really, easy breezy kind of diagram so they just get an idea of what you're actually talking about. Keep it simple. Okay. So it's really quite simple. A daddy puts his penis inside of the woman's vagina. Again, that's why terminology is so important, because if they come to you and you're going to have this conversation and they don't even know what a penis or a vagina is, then it really can be a little bit disconcerting for them. And it's this piece about closeness and loving. And I think that's important as well, is set the stage that this is a physical relationship that is about, being close to somebody, the husbands and wives being close to each other, partners being close to each other, and that it's a very loving physical connection. And that's important to set up now and all the way down the line, that this really is a physical relationship, intimate relationship that is a loving relationship, and that both people need to really agree upon this.
Right.
So penises inside the woman's vagina, they're very, very close. The daddy, releases this tiny little cell called a sperm, and it swims, and that looking what a sperm looks like is so great. It's got this little tail. You can even have some fun with it, that it's serious, but helping them to understand. Again, the book Where Did I Come From it's got such humor to it, because we take this so seriously. So, and the sperm is going to swim to the egg. And the greatest piece is when they connect, when they meet, and that's the beginning of you. And put a smile on your face and make it simple at that point, and then stop. You don't want to go on and on and on. Make it, less is more. I always believe in less is more.
Yeah.
And stop and don't say anything. Give them the opportunity to ask questions, or to say, "Oh, thank you," and they'll walk away.
Or in the case of one of my children, "I wish I didn't know that."
Right. The older they get, that's what they say.
Yeah.
As a rule, when we're talking about those 4, 5, or 6-year-olds, you can almost see the wheels turning, trying to figure out the whole process, and then something goes off, and like something's been met. They got what they needed, and they're off again. And the beauty of this, the absolute beauty of this, is that honesty, even if it's uncomfortable for you, is it really does open the door for them to feel comfortable to come back when they've maybe been thinking about what they just heard, and they have another question, and they feel like they can trust you and you'll answer their question. And this is important. They will always catch you on a lie. Those kids are so smart that they will. So be willing, to tell the truth. And, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable, it really opens the door for further conversations. The other piece is, not only does it do that, I think it helps them also to feel safe and comfortable in their own bodies. That these things happen, they're perfectly normal, and mommy and daddy are willing to talk about them, and that helps them to feel secure in their bodies and, and they're setting up a stage for healthy self-esteem.
So we have one commenter who says, why would we want to tell a 6-year-old about this stuff?
Well, you have a choice. Why not? Absolutely why not? Because if you don't have these conversations, then where are they going to go to? And you can either initiate it, and most parents are a little bit more uncomfortable doing that, but as Kristen said, you're setting the stage for these conversations. You're hoping they're going to come to you, and that is the perfect, situation. But if not, then you're going to at least create other conversations that lead you to this conversation sooner than later.
And so if we were a parent who said, I'm just going to I'm going to be very open, but I'm going to wait for them to ask me the questions, what is the point at which we go, okay, I'm going to need to be proactive because they haven't come with the questions?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of things. It's if they're not asking you any questions, and there is this discomfort, there's this general discomfort that is around this topic, then I think it's really important to start opening the doors for the basic conversation, making sure the basics are set in motion. Talk about exactly what you said. Different babies come from different situations. Where don't babies come from? I think that's a great conversation. There are books out there. I think that's another way, is that if they don't start the conversation at some point, and that's the question you're asking, I think, really before they go into kindergarten, actually, that having this conversation is probably a good idea. And yet I know parents go, well, why? Why should we start so early? Because this is part of healthy maturation, of knowing these basics so they know they're comfortable in their bodies, they're comfortable in this topic, because I believe once they hit school, they're going to hear all kinds of things.
Let me, from a therapist's perspective, give an opinion on why it's useful to tell kids earlier. Is, one of the things that we, all parents, have to be concerned with is both child sexual abuse, but also early sexual exploration between kids, which can be as damaging as sexual abuse. But in a very different way. It could be, a child who's exposed to something or who was abused themselves, and then, that kind of becomes a contagion around other children. When kids know what sex is, they are more likely to come home and report. When kids find themselves in a situation where they're being abused by an adult or another child and they don't know what's happening, they're more likely to hide. They're more likely to be confused and ashamed. And then when they, in the future, learn what sex is and realize that those behaviors were behaviors they've been engaged in, it's even more shaming for them. So it's much better to get ahead of it. And obviously we're all hoping our kids are never exposed to anything like that. But if we look statistically, we also have to be realistic. And I do think there is some preventative benefit of telling children early on what sex is. Because then if an adult or another child is ever inappropriate with them, they know what that's called and what is happening.
And I think that's really important, especially, again, with the statistics that are out there with that particular issue. I think young children, all children, are curious by nature. And I think many times they're curious about this whole process. And I think we as adults are concerned about somehow damaging them with this information. And I think there's nothing that's going to hurt them. There's nothing damaging about the basics, especially in the context of, intimacy and love, and that it's healthy at the right time. And I think this is education that young children will take in as much as their brain developmentally lets them. Yep. And then they sort of digest it, and then they come back and we want them to ask further questions. And as we have these conversations in the next couple of weeks, it sort of fits so perfectly at if you start too late, then there's catch up. That you have to sort of go through. And they're already starting to feel so uncomfortable in their bodies. Young children are real comfortable in their bodies. They, it feels comfortable. It's natural. So even for them, this topic doesn't feel the same way that it would to an adult. This isn't sex when we talk about it in terms of an adult. Even when we talk about masturbation, it's not the same thing. This is something natural. And if you do any kind of research about the Scandinavian countries, they've been having these conversations for years. And young people feel so much more comfortable in their bodies. Their statistics are much lower than ours.
Madison said something about giving kids the language of consent, that you can say no. And I want to say a little note on that, especially when we're talking about 5, 6, 7-year-olds. Sure. I do think that consent is very important. And I think one of the ways that we teach our children consent is that we teach our kids body autonomy, so that we do not force kids to hug people they don't feel like hugging, to kiss people they don't feel like hugging. That when you engage intimately with another person, and kissing and hugging, those are intimate acts, those are things that both people have agreed upon. Right. So one of the things we always did, when we were around relatives, is we would say, do you want to give grandma a kiss or a hug or a high five or knuckles? But we offer it to the child, and there have been a few times where other adults have said, like, come on, come give me a hug, and the child is clearly distressed, which that's kind of a generational thing. We've had to really gently say, like, look, we don't force any kind of, like, every kid can say no, even to adults, because if we set it up that authority figures or adults can demand physical contact, on demand, they get set up in situations, where they don't feel like they have autonomy if something bad is happening. So,
and going along with that is the whole issue of boundaries. I think that whole issue of it's so much greater than the sex talk. It really is inclusive of talking about boundaries. It's talking about what feels good and being able to say no. And oftentimes, I think what we need to teach our children is to listen to their intuitive. Is if it doesn't feel comfortable to speak up, to have a voice. And this is another thing to start early on. If something doesn't feel comfortable, if a relationship or something in their body, giving them the terminology so they can actually tell you if something doesn't feel right. This is part of the conversation as well. It's not just about sex. It's so much more. It's about helping young children, the 4, 5, and 6-year-old, to be comfortable in their body, to have a voice, to create boundaries that are healthy boundaries. And I think this is so much a part of it beyond the basic sex talk. And I think this is where parents also need to look at that conversation as well and get comfortable with that as well. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and consent goes both ways. So while we're educating our kids on how to say no, we also have to educate our kids on how to stop. So a lot of the conversations that we have with our kids is, tickling's happening, and one kid says no. I don't care if they're laughing. Someone says no, you stop. Right. And we have a lot of lessons on that, of like, hands off. Someone said no. Because, it has to go both ways, and it's important for boys and girls to really understand that someone else's body boundaries are to be respected.
And I think this is a really good conversation because we've seen the results, the consequences down the road in high school and college, when those boundaries and that voice and those languages have not been set up, and young women and men pay the price for it then. So this education starts at this point, and then it's reinforced. What can we do for girls to give them more language? How do we have respect? All of these things sort of are looped in to this whole conversation that then really impacts them in junior high and in senior high and as college students, because the statistics in our college students of date rape and not consent and young girls not having the voice is quite high. So we really want to start the conversation earlier than later, and most of all, get comfortable with it. Speak in front of the mirror, read a book, but find your voice. Find your voice. Don't be afraid of it. And you can't do it wrong. I think we're all such good A types, and we want to do it right. You can't do it wrong. But if you don't do it, that's really the challenge. And the longer you wait, the harder it gets, and the more challenging it is to really have that conversation with your children.
I agree. Well, I would encourage you to check out Leslie's website, birdsandbeesconnection.com. She's got a ton of resources. She has book ideas. And if you are local to Orange County, she has amazing classes. In fact, we are hosting in 2 weeks a puberty tea at my house for my daughter and some of her friends, which is a great way for girls to feel empowered about all the coming changes in their body.
And we have all the resources on our website, so if you want to see books to read or websites to check out, we've got them there for you. We've got you covered.
And I'll pop a link in the comments right now as well. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to be back next week talking about the next developmental stage and what we should be talking about with them.
Thank you.